This exclusive BBC interview takes place against a background of sleaze, uncertainty and a general hemorrhaging of confidence in the government. Alan Bastard has had an extraordinary political career. Elected to Parliament in 1987 with the largest majority in the House, he made an immediate impact as a rising star of the Tory right, survived an assassination attempt and 2 years incarceration in a Soviet gulag before returning for a term as a Euro MP. So profound has his impression been on national politics that Mr. Major even named a group of dissident ministers bastards in his honour.
True.
Last Thursday, Alan Bastard returned to the House of Commons in a spectacular by-election victory in the former Welsh Labour stronghold of Maesteg. It was the first Conservative by-election success since the general election.
First of many, Brian.
Then do you see your astonishing victory as an indication of an upturn in the government's fortunes?
Of course, it's good news for the government, Brian, as it is for the country and, well, the entire Western world. But I think my 26,000 majority is also a personal vote, if I may blow my own trumpet, for the name Bastard and for everything it represents. Honesty, probity, sincerity.
So you must have been shocked when the other candidates in last Thursday's contest met a violent end on the eve of polling.
Yes, of course. It was a cruel twist of fate that my two opponents, whilst visiting the last working coal mine in Wales, should be crushed to death by a falling skipload of stolen ballot boxes. Awful thing to happen, even to a socialist.
Some might say, Mr. Bastard, that it was more than a coincidence.
Perhaps you're right, Brian. Perhaps it is a godsend, a sign from the Almighty that I, Alan Bastard, have been chosen to return to Westminster and electrify our moribund political scene.
And it's that moribund political scene that I'd like to address now. During your first term in Parliament, though you never left the backbenches, you were rumoured to be extremely well connected to many members of the Cabinet.
Well, let's just say I was on more than nodding terms with Norman, Cecil, Geoffrey and Norman. Of course, I can't mention any names, although I would just like to take this opportunity to say thanks for the Anglia shares tip. I'll remember you at Christmas.
Mr. Bastard, may I ask whom you were addressing?
Oh, he knows.
If I may return to the question of Westminster.
Of course.
In your last spell on the backbenches, you piloted through the Police Firearms Act and nearly achieved the reintroduction of capital punishment. Do you believe you'll be able to have a similarly spectacular impact now?
Oh, more spectacular. You see, when I left the Commons, the front bench was full of people of vision, led by a visionary woman. Seriously, visionary woman. Oh, God. You see, I mean, nowadays, Brian, to become a minister, all you have to do is put an X in the box marked no personality.
Very interesting. Then perhaps you could expand a little on what you think you'll bring to the parliamentary scene.
Of course. Well, my personality, of course. Sheer sexual magnetism, impeccable dress sense, all go without saying.
I was thinking of the personal manifesto you campaigned under last week.
Oh.
Do you stand by the groundbreaking policies?
Indeed I do. Indeed I do. I think it's absolutely vital in this day and age that a politician should express his beliefs in simple, clear terms that even someone with a state education could comprehend. Ever since I became politically active, I have stood for the 4 principles of freedom, low taxation, the eradication of restrictive labour laws and the radical restructuring of the welfare state.
But with respect, Mr. Bastard, haven't these once radical ideas been adopted wholesale by the Conservative Party?
Yeah, and stolen by the Labour Party. But, I mean, Brian, these two parties, led by Mr. Grey and Mr. Blair, I mean, they only pay lip service to my ideals. Of course, I don't have to pay for lip service, and supermodels and film stars queue up to service my lips.
If we could return to your political principles.
Of course, Brian. As I said, they are 4 in number. By freedom, I mean complete freedom. The liberty of the citizen to do whatever he wishes within the most libertarian framework of the law. He should be free to take drugs if he wishes, to indulge in whatever sexual acts his imagination can devise, to drink whenever he wants to shop whenever he wants to. Low taxation follows automatically. the legalised trade in drugs and pornography will contribute enormous amounts of VAT, allowing income tax to be abolished on all, except the lowest paid.
But the poorest would continue to pay income tax.
Someone has to.
Why?
Well, because poor people vote Labour, and so they'll get no favours from me. And the poor are the biggest consumers of government spending, which brings me neatly on to my third point. The elimination of restrictive employment legislation. Quite simply, we don't need any. When was this country the leading industrial power in the world? When we sent children up chimneys, women down mines, and trade unionists to Australia. No coincidence, I contend.
Let me make sure I understand you correctly. Essentially, you seem to be suggesting a return to the industrial environment of the early 19th century.
I am.
Before the abolition of slavery.
I think you make my point for me. And don't be so pious, Brian. We both know slavery still exists in many societies.
You're thinking of the forced labourers of the Indian subcontinent.
I'm thinking of the poor bugger who until last month was running British Gas on a pathetic $250,000 a year. And my fourth point, which again fits perfectly into my overview, concerns the welfare state. In my opinion, this is the single most disastrous development of post-war social policy. It has made people unfit, lazy and self-indulgent. I mean, the ordinaries know that free medical care awaits them, so what incentive do they have to stay well? As I said, on the record, in 1987, in the good old days, you were poor, you got ill, you died. Today we face the appalling prospect of young, fit, virile men like myself giving up to taxation a larger and larger proportion of our wealth to support ailing, aging people like yourself, Brian. So
let's summarise here, because I want to be sure not to misrepresent your position. If you, in the words of Harry Seacombe, ruled the world, the only tax the rich would pay would be on their cocaine. Infants would toil in dark satanic mills at unguarded machinery, and the old and infirm would die off in their hundreds of thousands.
Yes?
But of course I must ask, and you'll understand why I must put this question, why should the public take seriously the extreme political views of, with all due respect, a maverick?
Brian, I must reply, and you'll understand why I must reply, that I am more in touch with the man in the street than you in your Channel Islands hideaway. And one thing I know for certain, the great British public is sick to death of sleaze. And I must agree with them. When I read that certain backbenchers were selling questions at £2,000 a time, I was physically ill. That's the Conservative Party, the party of Peel, Disraeli, Churchill, Callaghan.
Jim Callaghan was a Labour Prime Minister.
Was he? Yeah, just making sure you're paying attention, Brian. Anyway, would these political giants have accepted 2,000 pathetic pounds to do their duty?
But many have said, and you've never denied it, that you're the Member of Parliament who pioneered cash for questions.
Well, exactly.
Back in 1987.
And even then, the rate was 10 grand a question, or 20 grand if you wanted an answer. And along come these Johnny-come-latelys and wreck the marketplace.
So you see nothing wrong with the principle of cash for questions?
It's a time-honoured tradition, Brian. How else do young, eager backbenchers get promotion? If you're prepared to ask enough arse-licking, sycophantic questions of ministers, you're rewarded with a junior minister's salary, a little red plastic briefcase, and a second-hand Rover. No, cash for questions is the way of the world. You only have to watch one of the many television quiz shows to know that the ordinaries love cash for questions too. Brian, I mean to say, if you can win £3,000 and a small family plebmobile for guessing which 5 items 100 cretins would choose to take on a picnic, surely embarrassing the government over the ownership of Harrods is worth more.
Now, if we may recapitulate, do you hope, even as a backbencher, to see your views become translated into policy?
Well, as you implied in your opening remarks, I do have very good connections.
Ah, but with respect, Mr. Bastard, unless I fail to catch your drift, the ministers to whom you were close are now almost without exception out of office, including Lady Thatcher, of course.
Yes. That was a tragic day when Margaret was overthrown.
Let me remind you of the circumstances of Mrs. Thatcher's demise. After the first ballot for party leader, she had a narrow lead, but was 4 votes short of the absolute majority required.
I know. And if I'd known then how close the vote was, I would have made sure I'd voted myself. I would have got out of bed, got dressed and said, Sarah, I'm sorry, I know no one else can satisfy you, but there's an important vote and I must toe that line before I toe yours.
Sarah being your wife's name?
Quite. And also the name of the Duchess of York, but let's not go into that now.
Rather than be sidetracked down that peculiar cul-de-sac...
Oh, you've been there too, have you?
Let's return to Mrs. Thatcher's problem.
Ah, you mean Dennis?
I mean that when she found she'd not won on the first ballot, all her closest advisers told her to return to England and campaign hard to win on the second vote. But she chose to stay in Paris. Why?
I don't know. I just don't know. Overconfidence? Perhaps she'd mislaid her passport.
I think you do know the reason, Mr. Bastard.
Hardly. We were intimate, Brian, but we were never close.
Very well. An interesting document has come into my possession. It's a telegram from Mark Thatcher.
Buy nothing without consulting a lawyer. I know he's got 50 tanks he can't get shot off for a start.
This telegram is dated November the 20th, 1990, the day of the first ballot. As she prepared to return to London to face down Michael Heseltine, she received this telegram. Mummy, dearest, I am lost somewhere in Paris. Can't find your hotel. No one I stop even speaks English. Please come and find me. On receiving this from her favourite child, she postponed her return by a fateful day, and the rest is history.
It's a funny old world.
And yet the telegram's clearly a forgery.
Oh, no, you can't be sure of that. I mean, Mark is always getting lost. They named the No Turning Back group after him.
It's easy to prove it's forged. There were no spelling mistakes.
It's very interesting, Brian, but as I say, I know nothing about it.
I think some would say that you're too modest. As the Daily Telegraph, hardly a left-wing organ, put it, Alan Bastard knows where the bodies are buried. What do you say to that?
That's just a figure of speech, Brian.
Usually. Now let's return to the events that followed Mrs. Thatcher's demise. In no particular order, we've seen the collapse of the poll tax, the Matrix Churchill affair, Black Wednesday and Britain's ignominious exit from the European exchange rate mechanism, and the levelling of VAT on fuel, in direct contradiction of the Conservatives' main election promise.
Yes. Who'd have thought all of that could have been fixed by a political novice like young Blair?
I hardly think, Mr. Bastard, that we can lay all these woes at Mr. Blair's door. I think we must look elsewhere for the prime mover, Mr. Bastard.
Brian, I'm flattered, but surely you can't be accusing me, a humble backbench foot soldier, of a complex plot to undermine the establishment. Brian, like I told Bill Clinton, too much coke will make you paranoid. Just put the gun down. Anyway, the roots of this great country are far too strong and go far too deep. There's no way one could undermine our way of life, especially as we have a strong monarchy.
Ah, yes, the monarchy, which brings me very neatly onto the issue I'll be pursuing in part 2 of this programme. But first, we must go over to the newsroom. We'll be back.
3 minutes, studio.
I think it's all going rather well, don't you, Alan?
What are you talking about? That brings me very nicely onto what I'll be talking about in the second half. I've never been near the Princess of Wales. The man in those photographs is a look-alike.
What photographs?
I didn't mention any photographs.
Alan, why do you never call? It's been 3 years.
What?
Well, the baby's walking and talking now, and he keeps asking who his daddy is.
Well, I hope you had the presence of mind to say Cecil Parkinson.
Oh, Alan, don't you remember the promise you made to me when you tied me to the bedpost?
Right, that's it. Sack this woman, please. She's sexually harassing me.
But she's been with us for 13 years.
So has Margaret Thatcher. It's quite long enough.
Alan!
Thank you!
Oh, I'm sorry, love, you're sacked. Delphinia.
Good grief.
Alan, darling, why don't you ever call?
What? Well, who are you?
Well, it's been 6 years now, and the twins are the absolute image of you. Why don't you come and meet them?
Oh, this is absolutely outrageous. I recognise you now. It's Delphinia, isn't it? Is this your idea of a joke, Walden, or are you just trying to destabilise me before the second half?
Alan, I wouldn't dream of stooping to such low devices. I'm not Jeremy Paxman.
Yeah. Oh, shut up! Listen, there's 10 grand in it for you, if you can get me a look at his clipboard.
15. It's blank.
I don't work off notes.
Oh, God, you think you're so clever, don't you, Waldron?
Alan, I don't think it.
Yeah? You little...
Alan Bastard.
Brian!
Before the break, you pointed out that ultimately the stability of our society depends on the stability of our monarchy.
Absolutely, Brian, absolutely. And I yield to no one in my admiration of Her Majesty the Queen, who has performed her role with such dignity.
And yet, wouldn't it be true to say that the undermining of the status of the royal family started at about the time you entered politics?
Brian, with respect, I am just one loyal subject. Now, I admit the royal family have not had the best of luck. I admit the marriages of the Queen's 3 oldest children and of her sister have all failed. I concede that the damning revelations about the Duke of Edinburgh in Kitty Kelly's biography...
You've seen a copy?
Oh, yes. And I grant you that the Queen's youngest child has failed to make his mark, either on the Royal Marines or Andrew Lloyd Webber's really useful company. And maybe the Princess of Wales and the Duchess of York do lead more lurid private lives than David Mellor.
In the light of all you've said, how did you feel about the release of audio tapes exposing the heir to the throne and his wife as what left-wing commentators have called a pair of immature, smutty-minded adulterers?
I was more shocked than I can say.
And yet, is it not one of your many companies that's made these tapes, available to the general public on 0898 phone lines at 50 pence a minute?
Brian, I'm a capitalist and proud of it. The pain I feel for the royal couple cannot distract me from my God-given duty to make money wherever possible. But my sympathy for them is undiluted. I wrote personal letters to Charles, Diana, Major Hewitt, Mrs. Parker Knowle.
I believe you mean Mrs. Parker Bowles. Parker Knowle make recliners.
Precisely.
So you wrote to all of them. Did you receive replies?
Indeed I did, and I cherish them.
Cherish them so much that I hear you've sold them to the Sun for £50,000.
Well, I cherish anything worth £50,000.
Which is what I believe you received for the photographs of Princess Diana in the gym.
I wonder if any of your viewers realise that Brian's so-called impartial Walden used to be a Labour front-bench spokesman.
Let us return, Mr. Bastard, and I think we should, even though you're trying to sidetrack me, to your undying loyalty to the throne.
You ought to do this for a living, Brian. You're very good. Yes, I believe the monarchy is a great boon to our nation, to our tourist trade, and after all, whose face will be put on the stamps? Cilla Black's. And that is why I am not ashamed to say that after the dreadful Windsor fire, it was I who urged my very good friend Peter Brooke, Secretary of State for National Heritage, and as delightful a dullard as ever wore an MCC tie, to announce that the government will be proud to pay for the rebuilding of one of the 5 homes of the world's richest woman. And if it meant less money for hospitals, schools, and old-age homes, then the people of Britain were willing, nay, eager, to make the sacrifice for their sovereign lady and her feckless family.
But I put it to you, Mr. Bastard, that many people date today's deep disillusion with the institution of the monarchy from that announcement of Mr. Brooks.
Brian, just because a policy is unpopular does not make it wrong.
Mr. Bastard, have you ever visited Windsor Castle?
Well, only after the conflagration, when I was, yes, among the volunteers who worked through the night, clearing the debris and helping to rescue priceless works of art.
I believe several small, priceless works of art went missing during the clean-up.
Brian, please, I will not hear this slander against our brave firefighters. Well, unless you're suggesting the Duke of York stole his mother's knickknacks. I mean, I know he's got a high-maintenance wife, but still.
But until that night, you'd never visited Windsor Castle.
Absolutely not.
That's very interesting, Mr. Bastard, because I have here the visitor's book for Windsor Castle. Is this your handwriting?
Could be.
Would you care to read what it says?
Lovely place, but a bit cold. It could do with a nice roaring fire to warm things up.
And it seems to be your signature.
Anyone can sign my name, Mr. Walden. Look, where did you get that? I know, this has got John Prescott's handwriting all over it.
No, Mr. Bastard, your handwriting.
Oh, yes, go on, go ahead. Oh, blame me for everything that's happened to this country since the year dot. Sinking of the Titanic, yep, that was my fault. And the death of King Harold in 1066. And how about the abdication crisis? Oh, and I suppose I was to blame for the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait.
Why, I do have an invoice here from yet another one of your companies, Enormous Weapons plc.
Well, I think you should sack your researcher, Brian. Enormous Weapons plc do not make guns, they make penis extensions. Would you like a card? Or perhaps I should give you two.
But you don't deny supplying one to Saddam Hussein.
No, nor that he was personally recommended by another client, Alan Clark. But if I'm to take the blame for everything, then why not some of the credit, too? How about peace in Northern Ireland? I didn't benefit from that, did I? In fact, my Irish voiceover agency has taken a savage hiding. Although I am hoping to persuade Radio 4 to have Prime Minister's Question Time revoiced by former terrorists. They've got better manners.
Another one of your amusing little diversions.
I try.
Well, let's return to the meat of this conversation. You. Having listened to you for a fascinating 20 minutes, I can't help but form the opinion that you're the most formidable political thinker I've met in all my many years in and around the political scene.
How'd you expect me to react? Surprised?
And yet you continue to insist you have no great ambition or urge for power.
Oh, power's a hollow crown, Brian. Why do people aspire to it? What I mean is, people seek power as a means to an end. And to what end? Surely it is status, money, power, fast cars, big house, enormous amounts of sex, copious quantities of restricted substances, seats on boards, seats on faces. And I have all those things already. Why should I burden myself with the paltry trappings of office in this tuppenny-halfpenny country? No, I've been offered ministerial office on several occasions. 3 times since last Thursday. And Mrs. Thatcher begged me to enter the cabinet and pilot through the poll tax, but I said, bugger that for a game of civil servants. Give it to Portillo, that'll wipe the smile off his face.
But Mr. Bastard...
Please, Brian. I mean, you know. You've been there. You know. Parliament's just a second-rate debating society with a third-rate cafeteria. Well, if it wasn't for the free parking space, I don't think I'd bother.
But you did bother, Mr. Bastard. You bothered last Thursday. So the question must be, why? I suggest that once the great props of our system are knocked away, wouldn't there then be a job big enough and exciting enough even for Alan Bastard? For isn't it true that in your secret heart you see yourself as nothing less than president for life with absolute power?
That's absurd.
Perhaps. But to paraphrase Sherlock Holmes, when one's eliminated all the most likely explanations, the one left, no matter how absurd, is the solution. And I think the fact that your plan commenced with the removal of Lady Thatcher, the only person with ambitions as enormous as your own...
I know where you live, Waldron. You'd better start looking under your car in the morning.
I don't want you to think I'm being critical, Alan. Your analysis of what this country needs may well be correct. Several times in history, strong men have emerged at a time of crisis. I'm thinking of Julius Caesar, Oliver Cromwell, Napoleon, perhaps Winston Churchill. My point is, cometh the hour, cometh the man.
Yeah, if only I could last the hour.
I beg your pardon?
Oh, nothing. Look, you invited me on this programme to discuss the contribution I can make to the body politic, and instead you accused me of plotting to bury it.
Mr. Bastard, I'm only trying, and I'm sorry if sometimes my questions seem too personal, to get at the truth.
All right. To hell with prevarication and fudging. I'll give you the truth. Yes, I want power. Yes, I want to put this country back on the map. Yes, and if it means overturning the raddled, decadent, decaying pillars of this third-rate fetid system, then so much the better.
So to recapitulate...
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Waldron, there is no time to recapitulate. Now is the time for action. What has become of England? The land of Boadicea, Drake, Marlborough, Wellington. We allow ourselves to be led by timid, grey men and dictated to by Basques, Walloons and Flems. We bow to inbred, chinless aristocrats just because centuries ago their ancestors stole some sheep or shagged the king, or vice versa, or both. We're up to our necks in tradition and deference. Well, I intend to sweep all that away. England must arise.
You keep saying England. Surely you mean Great Britain.
Why on earth do you assume that? I mean England. England. The country where the wealth is created. The country where people of intellect, taste and breeding dwell. Not Wales, godforsaken hellhole where you can't get a drink or a shag on a Sunday, or a decent meal any other day of the week. And certainly not Scotland, a sort of freezing void full of unintelligible savages who do nothing on Sunday but drink, unless they're eating sheep's intestines cooked in a fox's bladder. And certainly not Ireland. Ireland? Why we wasted billions of pounds testing nuclear weapons in the South Pacific when we had Ireland on our doorstep is a mystery to me. No, I mean England. The real England. The South.
It's certainly a point of view...
Oh, shut up! We don't need these people! And an England rid of all these scroungers and hangers-on would be compact, rich and secure. Especially after I've built Bastard's Fence. Yeah, Bastard's Fence. 30 feet high, with 20,000 volts running through it. Hey, compared to my fence, the Berlin Wall was 25 quid's worth of tongue and groove from Do-It-All.
So let me make sure I understand you. You'd give Wales and Scotland their independence.
Yep, that's right, Brian. They can sod off tomorrow as far as I'm concerned.
And what of North Sea oil? We'd forego that?
Well, of course not.
And the profits of the distilling industry?
Oh, don't be silly, Brian. And obviously we'd also keep hold of all the grouse moors and salmon fisheries. I mean, we have to eat.
That seems a very unusual definition of independence, Mr. Bastard.
Not at all. It's exactly the same neo-colonial relationship we have with all our former colonies. I'm just being a bit more upfront. Makes a change for a politician, eh, Brian? Well, that's what this politician wants to do for the people of England. To make a change.
Thank you, Alan Bastard, for a fascinating insight into your political creed. And I hear over my earpiece that in the last 3 minutes our telephone lines have been jammed with thousands of spontaneous telephone calls supporting your crusade.
Thank you. Well, perhaps that just goes to prove my time has come, Brian.
Perhaps it has. Thank you, Mr. Bastard.
Thank you. And thank you.
Well, I think that worked out very well. Cheapest half-hour commercial in television history.
Yes, and it won't do your ratings any harm either, Brian. I'm the best thing you ever interviewed. Can't wait to see how the people react.
I've told you how they reacted. Our phones are jammed.
What? You mean you didn't make that bit up? God, that makes me feel incredibly horny. Where are those makeup girls I sat? Oh, no, to hell with them. Let's go straight to the top. Get me Sue Lawley.
Haven't you forgotten, Sally?
Oh, yes, come on.
If I may say so, unless I've misunderstood our arrangement, this seems a little light.
Yes, I'm sorry about that, Brian. It's just that on the way to the studio, I bumped into this goalkeeper I owe 40 grand.